Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around to the very last session before the keynote. We appreciate you're here, and we will hope you will get involved with the discussion that we will have with our panelists. So we're here to talk about the future of tangible interfaces, but we will also look a little bit into the past and present before we get there. It looks like we still have quite a few empty seats, but if it gets full, please move to the centers. If you see people standing, just make sure that you're not taking up extra space. So the panelists, and I'm really happy that we got everybody together, is myself, Lars Erik Holmquist from Northumbria University in Newcastle, UK. So I'll try to keep the process as orderly as possible. We have Oren Zuckerman from my lab in Herzliya in Israel, MILAB. We have Rafael, or Tico, as he's called, Ballagas from HP Labs in California. We have Hiroshi Ishii from MIT Media Lab and his friendly abacus. We have Kimiko Ryokai from UC Berkeley, and we have Haiyan Zhang from Microsoft Research, Cambridge, UK. Not Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have two Cambridges.
Real Cambridge.
Real Cambridge.
So we just, as we were preparing for this, we realized that we've been starting to do this in sort of 10-year increments. So Hiroshi presented the Tangible Bits paper, which we'll get back to, in 1997 at CHI in Atlanta. Almost 10 years later, Oren and me and Brygge Almer organized a panel, which Hiroshi was in as well,
yes,
on the state of tangible interfaces. And now we're, over 10 years later, we're now talking about the future of tangible interfaces, but we also have a very important acknowledgement, which is that Hiroshi won the Lifetime Research Achievement Award and gave a great lecture on Monday. How many were there? Everybody.
Great.
Thank you. So with this time schedule, we expect to see you next time at around CHI 2027 or something. The format for this is simple. We'll start with 2-minute introductions from everybody, and I'll use these very tangible timers to make sure that people keep to their 2 minutes. Then we'll start. We want to just take a step back and just look at the origins of tangible user interfaces before we look into the future and the world that awaits us in tangible. We're also going to do something that may shock or surprise you. We will be sometimes directing questions to the audience, either to any one of you or to somebody in particular. And also, of course, it is an interactive panel. Please, if you want to jump in. And we have a student volunteer. Can you stand up, please? Who will be... We'll be using a roving mic. So as we are being recorded, please remember to talk into the mic so that everybody can hear your question or answer. Okay, so now comes the first part, and I will actually start myself. And then we'll have 2 minutes from each of us, and we'll see how well these work. So in my... and I've been interested in tangibles ever since I saw Hiroshi's talk 22 years ago. I think that what we are seeing now is that we're seeing really the melting together of a lot of technologies. We don't really talk about an interface or a system or a software, but we have what I call a hard physical digital continuum. You have things that are more physical or more virtual, but the most interesting ones are the ones that happen in between, where we have everything from the completely physical thing like a chair and the completely virtual thing like a spreadsheet that we have been used to are now being replaced by things like toys, thermostats, smartphones that exist in the physical world, but they also rely very much on digital services. And also often they They don't actually even do most of the computation themselves. We're back to cloud computing or the mainframe, where we rely on services that can be on a different part of the world. But we still have these physical embodiments of these services. So I think what we're looking at is really the emergence of a new design material. We already talk about computation as a design material and data and AI as design materials. I think we have this physical digital is a new design material that we need to, especially me being at a design school, need to address and understand. So that is mine, and we will switch over to Oren.
So I wanted to talk about the merge of two really interesting research domains within our community. So TI and TUI we all know, very familiar with. And when we look at HRI, one of the fields within HCI that is looking at interaction between people and physical objects, we see a lot of research in social interaction, how people perceive and interpret physical behavior. I think that we can now start to look at this domain as a new field, that really look at objects that interact and people perceive them in a social way, and we can start to think about these ecologies of social tangibles. So we looked very much about tangible interfaces and interactive with one user, sometimes also with several users. But we have already performed a few studies thinking about these very subtle movements of objects that are not necessarily robots. We call them robotic objects, but we think we need a new term for them. Now we think very much about expressive objects. And we believe that as a community, all of us together, of tangible interfaces, with the TEI conference that help us focus on that, can start to really focus on this type of research, expressive objects that we can work with, interact with, and people can perceive them. With the next steps, looking at a lot of the research that's come from Hiroshi and many of the people that follow this legacy of the new materials, so we look at material user interaction. So if we take this to the next step, we can imagine these types of social materials that all of us can start to use as designers. We see more and more labs creating these types of materials for us, the shape change technologies, but looking at what is the social implication of these devices and how people can start to interact with it on a daily basis is something that can be extremely interesting, I think, for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will go over to Tico.
So my first Kai was 2003, which was still early days in the tangible user interface movement. And in that conference, I actually presented the iStuff toolkit, which was designed to support designers and developers to create physical and embodied interactions in the Stanford iRoom, which was an early ubiquitous computing space. And actually, I see Jan in the audience here. He was my advisor and on that paper as well. And Mary Morris, I think, is somewhere here. Maybe she was also on that paper. But since then, I've been, really passionate about, tools to help designers and developers to realize their visions for tangible user interfaces, and also creating new kinds of tangible user interfaces myself. And that's kind of what brought me and drew me to HP. So HP is actually pretty big in the 3D printing industry. We make industrial machines that are designed to, our dream is to transform manufacturing. So we've got these big factory machines that are intended really to compete with injection molding for final part fabrication. And our multi-jet fusion technology, the process that it's based on, it's super fast, super high resolution. But one of the key differentiating features is the ability to modulate material properties at the voxel level.
30 seconds.
So we're talking about elasticity, conductivity, and even color, things like that. And so we believe that, I'm excited to talk more deeply about that in the panel, but I really believe that programmable matter, this is kind of an early expression of that. And I think that could be the catalyst for the next phase of tangible user interface innovation and research. And I'm excited for what the future holds.
Thank you. And we go over to Hiroshi. 2 minutes.
Hi. It's kind of a really surprise that when Tangible Bits was born in 1997, I was really not sure how this can survive. But now having an amazing community, first of all, I want to thank the people who started tangible, embedded, embodied interaction conference. Some of the, could you raise a hand, program committee members? The many people, steering committee members, researchers really joined, believing tangibilities, embodiment is something important. Currently, most of information is intangible, pixel, and abstract, stuck in a screen or somewhere. So eyes are in charge because pixel, but hands are underemployed. We have amazing organ, hands, dexterity, which we should take advantage of our body. The reason I choose orally is representation of knowledge is important. So tangible representation enable you to grab, rotate. Then your kinesthesia, proprioception become part of the solar system. This coupling is something important. Tangible is not specific product or smartphone or IoT, but a way of thinking, how to think to change the way of current decoupling of information out of our body and the physical space. Yeah.
Thank you. And we go to Kimiko.
Okay, so I'm Kimiko. I'm originally from Tangible Media Group, so instead of repeating what he just said, I'm going to say something different. So I'm using Erik et al.'s intersecting axis of privilege, domination, and oppression as a lens to argue that TUI has not reached far enough into our marginalized populations. So when certain quality is privileged and dominant, there is always other side that's often oppressed or non-dominant. Lars? Oh, that's, can you just?
Yeah.
Oh, no, okay. So, for example, one side there is an able body, but on the other side there are disabled bodies. TUI research started with interaction design based on our sense of physical body. But whose body are we really designing for? A stereotypical body or the messy variety of imperfect but equally real bodies? So male versus female is another axis. Recent efforts by feminist HCI research such as Fox, Borzell et al. Are truly inspirational. I believe future TUI research has a great potential to make impact in this area. So class is also an axis. Settled versus homeless, for example, is another. Rain City Housing Bench project is a great example of physical design in public. A bench with a pull-out back that provides temporary shelter for homeless. TUI can move more towards serving us in public space. So color is also an interesting axis, dominant preference for light and pale, but in fact we're all very colorful in terms of physical projects. Why do a lot of TUI projects seem to copy currently dominant industrial design? Clean lines, minimum colors, but why not celebrate other styles, messiness, colorfulness, and styles from different countries or culture. So here I was able to call out only a few axes, but we can do similar exercise along any of these axes to see whom might the TUI design privileging. Today, more than ever, TUI research needs to go beyond the familiar and privileged and learn from vulnerable populations. Thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Haiyan.
Hi, I'm Haiyan from Microsoft Research. So last year, my group at CHI 2018 presented the project Zanzibar, which you can see in the video on the left. So here over a number of years, we'd been working around sort of interactive physical digital systems, and we were really asking, why aren't tangible systems more prevalent, to the consumer? Why aren't they being used everywhere? And so we really focused from an engineering perspective to say, well, how would we engineer a portable TUI system, a platform that would enable lots of different applications? So we combined capacitive sensing with NFC sensing so that we could allow touch gestures as well as object recognition through the object footprint as well as the NFC ID. And we thought this really opened up the space for researchers to experiment with TUI systems so that they didn't have to create sort of more permanent camera computer vision rigs. And then our group sort of has also done some work around more specialized systems such as Torino, which was demoed here at CHI, which is a tangible physical computing blocks for kids with sight impairment, Or the Project Physio, which is about kids with cystic fibrosis and being able to use their breath to play video games. And here's the question of whether are we thinking about platforms for TUI in the future, or are we thinking about specialization, and which can help us achieve more success? Because when you create a platform, you kind of have to make physical objects generic. And then in product design, there's this need to kind of look at the user and make those physical shapes fit for purpose. Whereas with specialization, with these tools where we can actually help kids with different kinds of sensing impairment to access technology, it's a really rewarding and enriching space. But at the same time, those physical tools are really very, very narrow. And so the question is it platforms or is it specialization?
Thank you, everybody. Can I just, again, some housekeeping. If you are standing in the back, there's lots of seats in front, and people can squeeze in. I see plenty of free seats, so unless you're doing it for health reasons like I am, standing, please take a seat. So while you do that, how many here were at the Tangible Bits paper presentation in 1997 in Atlanta?
Yes.
Not very many, so that makes me feel old. Were you there, Gillian? Yeah?
Great.
But that was really, I think, for many. I mean, there were so many ideas swirling around at that time, and I think one of the things that really crystallized what was going on with the move from the purely desktop virtual to the physical and tangible was kind of encapsulated in that work that Hiroshi and Bryggalmer presented at CHI 97. So I would like just to start with asking Hiroshi, who was also at that presentation.
Yes.
What was it like? What were you rebelling against, so to speak?
I rebelled against pixel empire, GUI, abstract, only the photons. I can't really hold or play. No joy of tactile interactions, or no advantage of affordance, for example. Well, it doesn't stimulate imagination. It can be anything. And this is one of the origin. Also orally, I talked. So I went to the Scientific Historical Instruments Museum, then tried to study what kind of beautiful tools represent the knowledge, mathematics, geometry, astronomy were abundant to the museum, replacing all the pixels. Then what we lost in the education, learning in the class. So that's the beginning. So I went to Harvard University collection of historical instruments. So I learned a lot. So I wrote a paper, Tangible Bits, try to show the importance of tangibility. But I'm surprised. Originally I thought ubiquitous computing is a god. It represents all the amazing ecosystems of GUI, the relative scale. But as I talked in my talk, Mark Weiser said that is exactly what he also wants to do it. Then even he proposed, let's use Tangible Bits together as a banners. That's really striking. So I understood, my understanding of Ubicomp is so shallow. Ubicomp philosophy, architecture, ubiquity. Also tangible stuff is not a real object. How to bring back the bodies into the equation. So this new way of thinking. So for me, publishing Tangible Bits almost rejected, rescued. Then Mark Weiser's message really drove me in a very positive, extreme way. So I really appreciate, encounter to those geniuses in this community.
Excellent, thank you. So now we are going to very quickly get into the future, we hope. And as I said, not only feel free to contribute and ask questions, but we may also be asking you questions. And use the microphone when you do that. So yesterday we had a meeting, a very serious meeting, where we went through all the questions that we had polled from everybody we met during the conference. And then we made this very highly stylized sheet of notes in my handwriting, and we condensed what we want to talk about into just a few keywords. So today we will really use that list of keywords that came out of all those questions that we had and that we got from others. And we will sort of try to address them and see how we can use them as the jump-off point to cover the future of tangible interfaces. So let's start with you, Oren. Which keyword do you choose?
So I would love to speak about materiality. So for me, one of the big inspirations for me always come from movement, from art, from dance, and from nature, looking at trees and leaves and many other types of movement in nature. And I really want to start to look at movement as material. So when we talk about tangible, we define what, borderline is. And I want to start including movement within material. Today we do it with motors. We start to do it with shape change. We're still at the, first few steps. It's really, really hard. And I would love to have more technologies to allow us to feel, as choreographers of tangible interfaces and start to both be very expressive and creative with these movements, but also understand what this movement means. And we know that the implications of movement for human beings is really, critical. So start to really use it as a new vocabulary, as a new language that use movement in a very systematic and expressive way together.
Thank you. What about Tico? You have a keyword.
Yeah, I'd also like to take on materiality as a response to that, actually. It's with this notion of programmable matter and shape-changing interfaces, I think it brings some really new kind of interesting challenges into our community. And, specifically today, we'll typically start a design process by selecting a material that we want to work with, and then we'll, use the material properties as design constraints and how we shape and craft our object that we're crafting or our tangible user interface that we're crafting. But with the rise of these more programmable matter ideas, it kind of flips that equation in a really interesting way. So now I can design my material to best fit my application, and I can even think about changing different areas of an object to have different material properties and have gradients in between. But then at the same time, nobody's going to go and design these objects voxel by voxel. And so how do we go about expressing these new designs and articulating these objects? And so I think there's a whole host of challenges that arise, and it gets even more complex when you get into movement and how do we specify that. But I think those are interesting questions for this community to take on and take to the next level.
What about Hiroshi?
I think those comments important because Oren said about the movement.
Yeah.
So kinetic materials, motions, energy. I use a dance. I want to make radical dance. So how to teach dance, how to choreograph to materials, to memorize not only the shape, but also dance, movement is a very, very fantastic thing. Also, what Tico made the point is important because 3D printing, computational fabrication dramatically changed the way. Usually people use existing materials, but you can design from deep level, molecular level, mesoscale level of the materiality. You can also tune the flexibility, viscosity, elasticity, or whatever, also electric stuff. So as linear, now CMU professors starting a morphing matter group, and she said, always digital shadow, physical materials, but a fully computer shadow, which can simulate behavior. Also using a computer simulation as a means to control to the printer, the material. So this combination of underlying digital computation and the new material science, chemical. Also another third stuff I said is, I want to grow the material, radical atom, rather than build. Build means Arduino, you can build. But biological world is amazing in terms of growth. So also there's some interesting holy grail. And in the end, I chose the term, not the material, but the body. How to include the body is fundamentally so interesting. You have all the kinesthesia or proprioceptions, also so many psychological research. If I close the eyes, then grab something, move, I know how long and how heavy, for example. Those stuff never be actually utilized to the HCI so far. My most fascinating stuff, Faraday's left hand law. So magnetic field, current, and also magnetic field, current, and force, for example. So I don't want to feel those kind of magnetic force in solar system, for example, through my body, also decoupling my processes and give the Kimiko, and then we can think. These are all the crazy idea, but how to bring body into the equation in something interesting frontiers. So embodiment of information is important, but also how to utilize body as an important media, taking advantage of proprioception and the kinesthesia is my dream.
Thank you. Kimiko.
Okay, it's okay to take a different keyword.
Yes, take.
Yeah. So, Hiroshi talked about vision-driven design a lot on Monday. But I would say that not everybody is comfortable starting with vision. And as a person who was trained as a psychologist and linguist joining before joining TMG, I really do appreciate human-centered design, participatory design. But oftentimes, crazy, innovative ideas do come from not the careful observation of existing conditions, but building on the crazy vision. So there's a tension between grounded theory approach and also a vision-driven approach. Where does that vision comes from? But I believe there are ways that PD, HCD, and vision-driven design can feed one another. So that's my next project, and I would be happy to collaborate and people in the audience on that as well.
Haiyan?
Right, I have to echo Kimiko's sort of statement that this idea of process, of how we arrive at great ideas and great instantiations of those ideas. So, coming from a background of computer science and then working in design at IDEO, so I have this sort of reverence for technology and engineering, but also grounded in user-centeredness. And so the question is where's your starting point? If you think purely from a human-centered design methodology, it's starting from the user. But at the same time, I think you can get great inspiration and great ideas from engineering and from science. So some of the work that we've done is to just look at the engineering. What can capacitive touch really give us? What can NFC sensing really give us? And can that inspire new ideas? Because we feel that, there's this aspect that's kind of visionary, but then there's also the vision of just what the actual realizable effects of the technology and how that can lead to new ideas as well. So I think that this tension I totally believe in, which is, do you start from the engineering and the science, or do you start from the people? Is there a process where you can kind of start both at the same time and arrive at something that can be made and actually works, but also is fit for purpose? And so this leads on to the statement of enablement, which I think is actually a very unique value proposition for tangible user interfaces, which is, enablement. People have many senses, and there are many, many people who are missing some of those senses, or who have, impairment in some of those senses. And this is, technology, there's an access barrier to technology when you are only relying on GUIs and touchscreens and sight. And so I think TUIs really open up this world of enabling everybody to access technology, no matter what their sensing capabilities are. And I think that's really, I think there's great work going on in Kimiko's lab and at MIT in this space.
Thank you. The one I put up there was sustainability, and which is very closely linked to scalability. So this was inspired. I read the other day that the Apple AirPod are basically designed to be useless after 18 months. So after that time, the batteries are so low that they're at like 40% capacity, and replacing them costs almost as much as buying a new pair of AirPods, which means that we will end up with landfills of lithium-ion battery tiny devices all over the place. There's really nowhere to get rid of them. And this kind of paints a horror picture or an opportunity for tangible interfaces. If we will have all these devices that have electronics and batteries and various capabilities embedded in them, we have to make sure that as this scales, or it is doing it in a sustainable way. And I think one of the ways that I see it is, rather than having either or, is this physical, digital hybrid object where you let the pixels do the hard work of the dynamics, and then you let the physical objects represent the multiple tangible modalities or multiple other modalities. And that is research that I'm doing right now, so I cannot answer exactly how that will happen. But I think that really is one way of actually accessing, addressing the sustainability. But I think now we could also start involving you guys a little bit. So, for instance, I see over there Gillian Crampton-Smith. And you were also one of the pioneers in computer-related design, and you at the RCA, and then IVRIA. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about the role of design in all this?
Well, I think there's always been but there are two sides to design, aren't there? Is what it is you're going to design, and then how it's going to be designed, and what it's going to look like. And I think those two things are going on and on always. But obviously tangibles gives another dimension for what something is going to act like and feel like and look like. So I think in some ways for the design side, it's enriching. It's kind of enriching life. Graphical user interfaces, they're fine, but they're very constrained. So I think that we started in the RCA looking at tangibles through Darrell Bishop, who was a product designer, and he thought, well, why couldn't we control computation through physical things? And so all his projects were about trying to understand the limitations of this. He also was looking at how through physical objects you could very much simplify interfaces. So for people who weren't very technical savvy, actually a GUI-based system is really quite tricky, and now it's got worse. So it could be a way, I think, of simplifying, of making simplified devices for very specific users, specific uses.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Anybody here or in the audience want to follow up? Hiroshi, want to follow up?
I want to thank to Professor Gillian Crampton-Smith, because RCA design community really understand importance of materialities, body, and informations, and you started amazing programs about the international design. And one of the former students, Darrell Bishop, did marble answering machine, not for users or solving tasks, just exploration, conceptual exploration, showing totally new type. That made a huge impact in the Kai 1990, I forgot. Anyway, everybody excited because new possibilities. So sometimes those ideas also came. A discussion about does it come from the vision or user-centered design or stuff? It comes all, but I think a conceptual exploration is so important. And asking something new question, often art drives us to ask questions. But also, technology is important. 3D printing completely enabled new way to start molecule levels, not human levels. That's totally opened the door. Also, synthetic biology. Now you can control genes. It's very scary, but also it's inevitable future. And user. But which users? User of today, tomorrow, or next quarter versus user of 20 to 100 is totally different. Today you say task, listening music, but the way to listening music compose dramatically change in far future. So user-centered design is very important, but if it becomes dogmas of the very highly structured task-based stuff, that may freeze the advancement. So I think what her group and her students, Fiona Levy, Anthony, you contributed, is something such an important thing. I want to thank again.
Thank you.
Haiyan said that there are two possible points of starting. One is from the technology and one is from user needs. But I've always thought that there are three. And the third one is to do with what you can communicate through the medium. And so the medium is the third point, I think.
I see.
Thank you. And you want to ask somebody?
Yeah, I wanted maybe to direct a question to Eva Hornecker. She's here. And she's also one of the pioneers of the field. So, instead of a question, maybe what do you either choose a keyword or I would love to hear your thoughts about the next stage in the future.
She's also the leader, intellectual leader of tangible, embedded, embodied interaction community. So I'd like to hear your voice.
I'm not the steering chair anymore.
Oh, no, but you're the mother.
I think there was at some point the question about the different approaches, and I think we need all of them in a community. It needs people who have the new visions and try them out, break new ground, and maybe others who say this is complete bonkers or this is the wrong way, but you may be creating new materials and so on. Or Ishii, you were kind of the first one to go on that mountain with a tightrope, and then there's lots of people following who start to build stairs onto that mountain to actually have a whole community on that mountain. So there's different roles in a community, as well as people who do very user-centered design, detailed case studies, because then after the vision, that's the next question. What happens if we have these objects? What can we do with them? How can we design them? Not just the technology, but also how can we approach them from a product design view or from an interaction standpoint, where it's also about the movement of the user. And if we implement them in application areas, what happens then? And there's still lots of questions that are open. We still get into the issues also with funding bodies in terms of explaining what are the benefits of tangible interaction. Within the community, we all agree, but outside of the community, it's still quite tricky because people say, it's much easier, much cheaper, and so on to just do it on a graphical user interface. That's, I think, still one of the biggest challenges.
Thank you.
Also, I want to acknowledge the Brick Almas, also Rob Jacobs, and also Albrecht Schmidt. Those are key people who started the first TI conference. So I want to see more people to have a good discussion, also talking about design and art and the materiality in those conferences. So I want to thank all these pioneers who started this committee.
So we have another. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Margot Brereton. I'm from Queensland University of Technology. Since Eva didn't say it, I want to say it. I think social is a word that's really missing on the slide. And the reason for that is that tangible interfaces are sort of, or many of them are inherently ambient and therefore social, and they bring people together around the objects. And I think the Eva and Jakob Boer's framework really expressed that well. I think we also saw it in some of ERP and some of the work that Hiroshi did earlier, and indeed with any tangible interface. But when we think about sort of augmenting humans and working with disability and things, we've often also had a very individualistic view of how do we augment that person. And actually that person is usually someone within a whole set of social relations and people who know how to read them and help them express. And so I think when we think from a sort of individual user point of view, we're actually not really amplifying the possibilities of these technologies in the way that we could. So I think that social is a very important aspect.
That's a good point. We'll put that in for the next one in 10 years. We'll put social in. Yeah?
Hello, I'm Penny Webb. I was also in Tangible Media with Hiroshi Ishii, and I graduated last year. So I just have a point in terms of your comments on social. So I think that we're also in a situation where we're in a privileged situation where we can design these kind of blue sky, conceptual, anything that we want, and we have the ability to do that because of the situations that we're in. But I think to Kimiko's point earlier in her introduction of the fact that we are able-bodied and there's always two sides to the spectrum, and I think it's really important that we really focus on the fact that not everyone is in the privileged situation that we are in, and I just think that it was really refreshing to see that people are thinking about this in the HCI community, that there's always two sides to the spectrum. So both on the social, as in amongst each other, but also in the social in terms of privilege. So.
Thank you. I want to jump on to another keyword, and I will, because we talked yesterday about two things, impact and influence. And I would like to start all the way over there at Haiyan, because I think you have worked in a way that really has a lot of impact when you've gone and worked with people like Emma, the Emma Watch, and you've also been reaching out to people through BBC and so on. You think that's a unique opportunity of tangibles, or would that have been the same in the GUI world, or is that even not a relevant question?
So just for context, I participated in a BBC documentary a few years ago, and in this documentary, we work with individuals with disability to help create technologies that would support them. So I think that it was an incredible way to showcase how physical, digital computing, how tangibles can really play a role in providing people with access to technology. There was actually one project that I think was really was influenced by sort of Kai and ambient displays, which was working with a family, and the boy who was 7 had a really severe epilepsy, and he would at night go into epileptic fits, and his parents didn't sleep. They had to stay up all night watching him through a very tiny black and white baby monitor. Because if he had a seizure and they didn't give him medicine within 10 minutes, he might be at risk of death. And they were just so tired all the time. And they just spent all night watching, just focused on this little grainy black and white video. And, as part of the intervention that we created a physical object that was an ambient display for the child's status, with the recognition that actually part of the stress is about sort of the intense focus on the task. And if we made it a peripheral, if we turned it into something in the peripheral vision, that it would kind of relieve some of that stress. And I think that's a real world application of some of the things that we've talked about in the past with TUIs as well. So
that's a very cool example. We will never have time to go through anybody, but I wanted to ask Rafael Vertical over there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a bit more of a gadget guy. You work a lot with drones and new forms of displays and so on. You can take the microphone there. What do you think that the sort of almost here technologies that were not around when TUI was invented, so to speak, what are the opportunities that we should jump on right now that come from the technical space?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say that I've always been greatly inspired by Hiroshi's work and all of his students, but the question was always like, where does this go and how does it get the product? For me, product ultimately is the keystone of any good invention. And you could say that's shallow, but if you want to have 1 billion users, which is ultimately what you want to affect the world. The only way you can affect the world is if you have product for 1 billion users. So that's why I think it's important to think about, like, one of the concerns I've had with tangibles is that they haven't permeated the marketplace, let me put it that way. And you could ask why. And I think Hiroshi and I have agreed on most things, but one thing we disagree on is that the pixel empire will never be defeated.
Yeah, I believe so.
And to quote Ken,
Dark force.
to quote Ken, he said, like, the reason people buy an iPhone is because we've evolved to like shiny apples. And so there's something about pixels, but the key word that's missing for me there is malleability. So the problem of tangibles is that they're not malleable. I had this discussion 15 years ago with a graduate student of mine, and he said, are you seriously thinking that people are going to come in with their bag of tangibles? No, they want their smartphone. Why? Because digital is malleable. And so if you ask me for a key technology, look, I mean, I'm a great promoter of programmable matter. I believe in that vision, but that's going to be 25 years. But what is happening today that allows us to integrate pixels back into tangibles is flexible displays. And so flexible displays allow you to provide digital malleability right on the surface of a tangible. And when you take that into a product design context, a whole new world opens up. And so I think that is, for me, the future, and that's what's happening right now, actually.
Anybody want to respond on that, here or there? Tico, maybe? Or, no, we have somebody over there.
Hi, I'm David Little from the University of Calgary. One thing that I was thinking about is we talk about, so Roel mentioned the role of product, and I think that's really important. But when I think about the idea of tangibles, I think disruption. What's happening, if you think of newer cities, like Calgary, for example, itself, it's a car city. And the reason is that it was established much later in time. And so what happens with that city now is that anything that you build on top of it is going to be set up for a car city. So things are widespread, there's no density. You have like big roads that are all like kind of all over the place. If you think of other places, like for example Paris, it's very dense, it's meant for walking, you can actually go from one place to another. So now you have this infrastructure that's been set up. And as you build on top of it, the only thing you can work with is what you have. And I think part of the issue with the quote-unquote pixel empire is that it's been established for such a long time, and now we're trying to disrupt that. And so the question is, like, how do we do that in a way that makes sense and in a way that it can either integrate what we have or completely displace what we have right now? So yeah, I think that all of this stuff kind of ties in really nicely with this idea of like vision versus human-centered design and the idea of like how can we actually progress from that. So yeah, just thought I would share that.
Thank you. And I see we have, you mentioned cars. We have Wendy Ju over there, who is working with one of the biggest tangible objects, the car. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking maybe the key word I think that some of Hiroshi's students have been doing work on is activation, because the old, tangible media are largely controllers, but there's some really exciting things when you start to have objects that have motors and can actually move around, like Sean Fulmer's work or James Patton's work. There's some really wonderful things. And I think that when you start to think about activating everyday objects, kind of in this like ubiquitous robotics vision, that's something that's running parallel to the pixel empire. It's it doesn't have to defeat it, but with every single chair in this room could be, a tangible media object, and we should think about that. But it also raises completely different questions than when we've been tackling so far with tangible media. So thinking about what's socially appropriate if the object starts moving first as opposed to if you move the object, thinking about what's going to make sense to people. I think there's some really interesting, cool problems to be solved that would make that possible.
Anybody want to jump in, Oren?
I'm happy to get back for a second to the question about our role, our researchers, and looking at research versus product, and really what should we influence? Where should we aim? And I think for good reason in companies we have both. Not in all of them, but at least in the large ones, we have the research department and we have the product department. So I think clearly for us as academics, for the academics in the table here and in the audience, we want to aim further. We want to look for the next step. If we're going to try and focus on product, that's a very short-term view that's just going to enhance the current activities. So doing things that maybe can't be productized right is exactly what we should do. And try to think about how do we inspire young students and inspire industry to think about the next 10 and 15 years. I think just one idea, following up on Hiroshi's body focus and sensing. So today we start to see research on sensory substitution, for example, which can be very relevant for people with disabilities and very, very exciting, for us as humans, as a very expressive, medium. It's very advanced, it's very complicated, but people do this type of science, and they do not know how they can make their science more practical. And as HCI researchers, we're exactly the perfect collaborators for them. So I think our role is to focus on further away and not the short term.
Can I then ask Tico, who is at HP, which is building or at least productizing a lot of highly related things, what do you think your role is?
Yeah, so, ultimately, I think companies are not going to be motivated by a particular technology. Like, we're not going to be driven to, make tangible interfaces successful. We're going to be driven to make HP successful. And so I think until, tangible interfaces are in our interests, it's going to be a tough sell. But I think I'd like to hark back to what Haiyan was saying about platforms versus specialization. And I think key to unlocking the value proposition for a company like HP is how do we create a platform that enables tangible interfaces to become mainstream, to actually scale it up and make it cost effective and things like that. And I think there's evidence that things like I think there's hints that there's some platforms emerging. One of them may be 3D printing. It's still a little painful to conjure a tangible object when you need it, but it's kind of moving in that direction in a very, if you blur your eyes. Another potential platform, and this may be heretical at this panel, but maybe virtual reality. And so, could you use your other senses to trick your sense of touch to allow you
I'm with Tico. Totally with Tico.
And so you have this notion of digital proxies or tangible proxies and even haptic retargeting, and I think those ideas could provide the platformization that you need to make something scalable. But I'd like for Hiroshi to respond to that.
I'm so excited that this has so many VR sessions. So dark shadow of the Pixel Empire is so strong. But we never give up. But give me one question.
We have one.
Oh, sorry.
One question over there, I think.
Okay. It was not a question, it was a comment on what Wendy, you just said. Hello, I'm Lenya from BMW. And I totally agree. I think that actually talking about tangibles, it will be more about everyday objects becoming digitized. I don't see so much like tangible objects artificially being created for a purpose. Might be also the case, but there are so many objects that are waiting to be digitized. And automated vehicles are just one thing, but it's a very interesting thing, I think, because if you look at it from the perspective that it's one of the few tangible objects at the moment that is autonomously moving, and there we go to your point, in space, but in a public space. And we'll have tons of robotic systems in public space in the future, and that will pose completely different questions on us, because it won't be about designing for a specific user, not a system that is deliberately used, but it's a system that is encountered in a public space by coincidence, by people who wouldn't even want to encounter them, who might have certain, be not maybe even afraid or don't trust the system. How do we deal with that? And movement is definitely a key issue on that. And I can tell you, working on autonomous vehicles and how they're perceived by the public, by pedestrians and bicyclists and so on for a while, that if you mess it up with the movement, it doesn't matter what else you have on there, So.
Kimiko, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also wanted to bring the keyword of users and bodies and I no offense to this panel, but to male panelists here, but I believe more women of different races from different countries, mothers and women of different ages and underrepresented populations should be part of that process. And, I think we bring different sensitivity to the vision, and I would like to kind of offer a counter image of what Hiroshi presented on Monday, which is this mountain, and there's a top that you're going. But I think the feminist perspective will bring more of that. Instead of that peak, one single vision in the peak, maybe the feminists will bring more of that confluence of different needs and different weaves of directions. And so I think more. I think that inclusivity moving forward is very important. Do you want to add?
Anyone else want to? Yeah.
I think Haiyan and also current special versus general, special purpose but general purpose so important. You can bring Swiss Army knife to the island. You don't have enough space. But also all the chef, all the craftsmen want to use all the hand tools. Also dentist. That's a beauty. You have a space. So how to strike the right balance between general purpose special? From this point of view, Zanzibar, you did so important. That's a dream. When we hacked the enchant garden like a toys, making sensitive. We don't know how to build really good platform. But making sensitive ideas, this is a platform on which many people can explore new tangible, designing a digital shadow. I mean, this platform, a common denominator called tabletop tangible interface, so important. Now it became one important field. Also, there's a conference. So Zanzibar is one of a dream. Also, Toyo is another great way. How many people know Toyo? If not, I'm not allowed. I don't know if I'm allowed to name the name of the company, but say Sony. Sony has a great. It's a small robot moving around. You can program. So that's also open door to the dynamic actuated workbench like stuff. Then people can find a lot of interesting applications using a common platform. So some common platform, even narrow boundaries, common denominators among these applications seems the key to go to the marketplace, maybe for a school or studio. So I really appreciate that Zanzibar is such a beautiful implementation, but also really exemplify the spirit, how to bring those stuff out of the research lab to let school or designer to explore not underlying technology, but mapping, digital computation meaning mapping to the physical object and the gesture and the shadow. So hope those research projects can continue to push the envelope of tangible. Yeah.
We had a comment from the audience.
Yes, I'm an audience member. So I look at the panelists up there, and I see one of them is wearing a visual augmentation artificial device. And this is the person who talks about the pixel empire, the glasses.
Sorry.
You're wearing something that's augmented you visually. Yeah.
That's one. Also 3.
Yeah. So you're wearing three tangibles which have screens, one visual thing, and so you are to me the embodiment of the future, because if one hypothesizes that Moore's law continues, and when we get to a point where, let's say, everybody has unobtrusive visual wearables, this will be the moment when, as somebody else in the audience said, every chair already is a tangible. Yes. And every wall and every table and every object we hold up and the screens will go away, because once the pixel empire takes over, then we will be living in the empire of tangible interfaces. And Hiroshi will have won.
I really like your comment, and maybe one of the most striking comments I got from my former student is perfect virtual reality and the complete radicatoms are indistinguishable. That's very profound. We thought we were battling totally different approach, but in the end, ultimate goal is the same. And also you do all the great VR stuff and AR stuff. So interesting. Aiming at far future like a dream, but going many different approach is something very exciting for me.
Total agreement.
Thank you, Ken. The Empire Strikes Back.
I think Ivan Sutherland would say the same.
Anybody else who... did you kill the whole one?
I have some words that didn't appear.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Sorry?
I didn't see charm or pleasure or grace up there,
Yeah.
which is sort of more process-oriented questions. Mm-hmm. And being somebody who works at the intersection of HCI and play and games, I think a lot about process. So it might tie into Kimiko's points, but I think that, you know, the privileging of the moment and not just the properties or the task.
Comments, Kimiko? Or
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think inspired by that comment and the previous one is something Hiroshi said earlier, which is I think the human experience and the human body is it's a really amazing experience that we have as human beings, that sometimes when we come from a technology perspective, we're just thinking about engineering a better screen, or we're thinking about sort of from the outside in of how to, you know, augment somebody. But actually, I think we need to embrace sort of, understanding the proprioceptive system, synesthesia, so all these kind of almost magical human experiences that don't seem rational or have an engineering perspective, I think will give us really amazing, tangible experiences. I mean, just sort of to hark back on a project that I did and really showed to me how amazing the human body is, which is Lars mentioned earlier with this young woman called Emma, and she has Parkinson's disease, and so she had a tremor as part of her Parkinson's disease. And we were trying to figure out, well, how can we help solve this tremor so that she can ride again? And we were really thinking about it from an engineering perspective. Let's make a motor that like counteracts, and let's make a rig that stops her hand from moving. So really thinking from an engineering perspective, of a physical motor perspective. And then we discovered that just by applying haptic vibration motors to her wrist, her proprioceptive system was disrupted and she was able to ride again. And that's not coming from an engineering perspective. I mean, it was very serendipitous, but it just amazes me, the human body, and how much we don't know. And coming from this kind of neuroscience perspective is also going to be really rich for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add it, I think that the charm, grace, and play is such a wonderful keywords. And I think we as women experience it differently from men, and also from different culture. Like Hiroshi and I from Japan will experience it differently from people in America or Europe. And so again, the diversity in how we process these different keywords and where we're going is going to be furthermore important.
Good.
I'd also like to comment on that from a design process perspective, actually. If you think back to Donald Schoen's reflective practitioner, a really important part of the design process is the back talk you get from the materials. And, I often wonder and worry about, like, what does 3D printing and that paradigm mean for that, moment of surprise and aha as you're assembling and interacting with the materials. And so how might we, reimagine this digital fabrication to allow for that element of surprise and that back talk from the material.
Yeah, I would also love to react. I think that, I would call it delight. I always love the term delight for, when we interact in the experience. And I think for kids especially, kids growing up today, the delight that they get from the, Pixel Empire is really amazing. We can't just ignore it, They really enjoy it. They get into this flow, in like 20 times a day, much more than we did. But we're missing out right now on creating tangible experiences that are so exciting and so empowering for children that they would prefer them over the pixel-based experiences. So I would love, more of us in the community to create this type of experiences for children.
Okay.
We have a comment over there, and Hiroshi, you can be silent a little bit. Jan Borges.
Hi, Jan Borges from Aachen University in Germany. I'm not sure. I feel a little bit like that kid that was promised a jetpack and then never got one. And in this particular case, I feel a little bit cheated by Mark Weiser's vision too. It reads beautifully, and I really like the long-term vision that Mark Weiser was proposing with ubiquitous computing. And the word I liked most in that article was the word calm. The reality today is that even a couple decades later, most of those devices that are supposedly smart are really a little bit like sociopaths. You know, my GPS will talk over me in the car. My phone will go off in the middle of a meeting. So we haven't really gotten to that calm, sort of confident state of existence through technology, but rather the opposite. And we're now seeing sort of the next wave of that rolling over us with, deep learning algorithms and not so easily explainable AI. So I'm wondering, I'd ask the panelists to do one of two options. Either convince us that with, since we're so early still in the history of what's going to be programmable matter or tangible computing, can you tell us how we're going to really get it right this time? Or if you don't have a good answer for how we're going to create a truly calm computing future with tangibles, if you don't have an answer for that, maybe just paint like the most terrible, dystopian future that programmable matter could create, or that tangible computing could create, in the sense of reflecting also on potential negative impacts of a new technology that we as a Kai community are trying to look at.
That's a good question for Hiroshi, I think.
I can give another 3-hour lecture. But calm technology, peripheral awareness, background is fundamentally critical. Also, Mark Weiser's disappearing technology is beautiful, but not perfect. When I'm a ping pong player, I'm very sure. How many people know the ping pong plus? Okay. Anyway, ping pong is such an important games. Then paddle, if you use many years, it disappears. Part of the body. When I do all the smash, I never be conscious. Only when something wrong, all the sudden focus goes. So this is invisible. But ball has to be visible. Also your partner, reference table. So what should be visible, what should be invisible, depending on the situation, is the most important questions. How to make information to be foreground when you necessary to focus, but not important. It becomes periphery, but you never forget, keeping in just below threshold. So that's a framework I propose in tangible papers. So I think how to balance foreground, background. Bill Buxton, John C. Brown, and Mark Weiser all discuss. So that's a still dream, not yet completed. One of the difficulties, keeping some information just before the consciousness, so difficult, depending on the situation. Also, so many people got rejected by Kai. So with more tangible. But you're right. In spite of the problems, matter or whatever, how to make information environment in which you can naturally manage a lot of things you have to do. Juggling so many balls, but putting 3 balls here, but 1 dozen balls all theirs. Then always you can be reminded, depending on the situation, but seamlessly moving stuff from the ambient to foreground, not easy. So if manipulatory, you can make a tangible. Ambulatory, we can do pointing, for example. So John Nakofura, my first PhD student, did all the gesture interface in the oblong industry. So his idea is every physical world has a digital coordinate. If you see anything, you can put anywhere. If manipulatory, you can grab, touch, attach. If ambulatory, you can point. So we need some kind of new architecture in which you can really manage, move around so many things, because all the people having so many things to do juggling. So calm technology is one important component. But when you wake up task, then bring back to foreground, naturally, it's another holy grail. So it can be another 100 PhD thesis. So if you want to write a thesis, come to me.
So we only have about 10 minutes left, and out of this carefully constructed notes, there was one word that really stood out. It stood out so much that I wrote it on the back, upside down. Inspiration. So we want to spend the last 10 minutes just talking about how can we inspire. We didn't get the jetpacks, okay, but how can we inspire research and industry to use the concept in the best possible way? Who wants to start? I can guess who. But Hiroshi? Inspiration.
I think Oren, you made a point. So many people captivated by pixel stuff application, and that's wrong, because Professor Kimiko Ryokai's airbrush is always shining star. Of course, pixels should be with physical one and embodiment, but important thing is pixels mean. Handheld paintbrush also means. But she created amazing experience to explore the physical world, then getting all the texture, then create a new piece. I don't know how many people saw a video of airbrush, kids smiling so proudly. So that's a moment. So we can make it. But that is beyond tangible or pixels. How to make engaging interaction design. How people see the world differently through this experience is a fundamental goal of interaction design. So still there's a lot of big rules and infrastructures like Zanzibar's or Toyo. Those really enable them cultivate the peoples. Then we can a lot of stuff, but also common platform make more economically sense. So hope we can continue this collaboration with also industry, finding some platform, maybe tabletop TUI, or something flying, maybe in 10 years.
Kimiko, what's your take on inspiration?
Yeah, he took my world perspective. Yeah,
she invented, not me.
No.
I signed the thesis.
Yeah, I think in the enablement is very important. I think the TUI has an amazing ability to use the familiar, but then open up a new lens through which that we can look at the world. And I hope in the future that lens is more sensitive to the areas. I think the public moving more towards public is inevitable, including not your typical users, but non-typical users, and always there are people who are not exactly like us, and having the lens that we enable diversity is. Yeah.
Tico, what's your take?
So, I personally am inspired by this emerging field. There's energy coming out of the intersection between material science and computation. So computational materials, we're so early on, and there's so much to do, and there's so much potential that I just my palms are starting to sweat just thinking about it. So, I would inspire any of the young people here, try to motivate you to think about these cross-disciplinary opportunities to create new opportunities for innovation in tangibles as well.
Cool. Haiyan, what about you? Inspiration?
Inspiration. Well, first I want to say that the projects that I think have been akin to Jetpack have come out of that I've seen have come out of Jan's lab. So I think you're getting us there. Inspiration. I think Jan mentioned deep learning, and I don't think we should be afraid of this. I think deep learning could unlock for us the magic of tangibles, because I think one of the biggest challenges of tangibles is the ability to digitize and sense the world in terms of the context we're in, the objects we're interacting with, how we're interacting with them. Every single engineered system seems to have occlusion, seems to have flaws. We just can't get that seamless, beautiful gestures that we want, right? And I think this is the point where perhaps deep learning can really solve that for us. So I would encourage everyone to kind of embrace their deep learning colleagues and try to get them to work for us. And then the other aspect was, this is perhaps slightly uninspirational, which is, I think, to move us forward into this kind of deploying tangibles out there is also the sense that you've got to get the concept right. You've got to get the core experience right, but then you've got to get things around the concept. So, I mean, this is maybe just boring stuff like calibration and unboxing, what, you know, people in consumer markets call the golden path. Is if someone opens a box and then they have to spend an hour calibrating the technology, then, you know, it's not a beautiful experience. It's not just about the core experience, it's about the entire user journey. And I think that's what we, in engineering and user-centered design, we need to kind of figure out what is that entire journey, in addition to the beautiful golden moments as well.
Thank you. Oren?
So I think I want to answer it in two ways. One is more like, you know, for me, inspiration always comes from, you know, childhood and also from just physical experiences that I really admire. So, you know, we all, you know, lived through many, many physical experiences with children right now, not necessarily live through the same experiences. And, you know, feeling, you know, the water, you know, running on our skin and, you know, walking in the woods and playing with the dirt, you know, are type of activities that are very sensorial and we all understand what they mean. And I think that should guide us. You know, we should not let, you know, the screen-based or the digital technology create such wonderful experiences that makes it so hard for children to experience digital physical experience that can be more similar to what we did in the past. So I think we can win, and there is a way to merge between the physical and digital. We're just not there yet. And for me, unfortunately, many industry forces focus on the short term and really utilize screens instead of thinking about what next we can do. Mm-hmm. So I totally think we can do it. And I think that, you know, you didn't understand, I feel, my comment before. It's not that children cannot experience physical experience and enjoy it. We just don't provide enough experiences like it. And maybe the second aspect is something which is easier to win in the short term and is still very, very, you know, important, which is just education and learning. And, you know, when we work with children and let them create something by themselves using digital technologies and, you know, physical digital technologies, we all do it, right? A lot of us do it with children, and it's so empowering. And, you know, just child working for 1 hour with an Arduino and setting one LED on, and that's it, is something that they're never going to forget for their life. And, you know, maybe they're going to become this amazing tangible interfaces presence that's going to make this future a reality. So that's really the inspiration for me.
Thank you. And I would like to say that I think it's really important with the people. So all the amazing people in the panel and in the audience, you have been role models and you have come up with, you've been going against the grain and doing crazy things when nobody believed in it. I know that feeling. But I also think that's really what made me, as a young PhD student and many others, see that what you can actually do with the intersection of the human and the digital. So I think that's really important. And I think also just being an academic with a lot of industry experience as well, I think we need to continue to create those spaces where it is possible to experiment with anything really and fail in interesting ways. Not everything has to be a success as well. So I think we are at the very end of the panel, and we're seeing a great keynote speaker in a few minutes who invented a lot of the things that we are also inspired with, Ivan Fjokarev. So you should all go and see. And thank you very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.